Melos Run, or走れMelos. Based partly on the classic tale of Damon and Phintius, or Phintius, but following in the main the retelling of this legend by the German poet Friedrich Schiller in The Hostage, Run Melos could possibly be the most widely read work by Dazai in his own country. Simple in style and highly moralistic in substance, the tale has found its way into many school anthologies and into popular editions of Dazai as well. Insofar as the Schiller poem will be unfamiliar to many, a brief summary is in order. Much shorter than Dazai's retelling, the poem contains just 20 stanzas of 7 lines each. In the first stanza, Damon the hero is seized by the guards of Dionysius, the tyrannical king of Sicily. Thereafter, Damon persuades the king to release him so that he can arrange his sister's wedding. The king agrees, on the condition that Damon return to face execution within 3 days, leaving his friend, named Philostratus in Schiller's poem, as a hostage. The wedding is described in several lines, with the remainder of the poem taken up mostly with the obstacles Damon encounters on his return journey to Syracuse, the flood, brigands, enervating heat, and the ominous news that Philostratus has likely been executed. However, Damon reaches the execution ground just in time, his effort wringing from the tyrant king the admission that fidelity is not the empty illusion he had thought it to be. Dazai both expands episodes in Schiller and adds some of his own invention. Nowhere does he add more blatantly than in the anticlimactic paragraphs depicting Melos as foolishly unaware of his own nakedness, a stroke that certainly deviates from the heavy didacticism of the tale. This passage, it should be mentioned, has usually been excised from the school anthologies, particularly when read alongside of Schiller's poem. Melos Run can almost seem to be a mock heroic tale, the passages that Dazai added to Schiller's work often portraying Melos as a somewhat proud simpleton. It must be admitted, however, that many critics do accept the hero's self-assessment at face value, and thus see him as embodying ideals of trust, fidelity, and friendship. So we start. Quivering with rage, Melos decided that he must rid the land of this wicked and ruthless king. He was only a village shepherd who tended his flock and played upon his flute. Yet, though ignorant of politics, he was more sensitive to evil than most other people. He had left his village early that morning and traveled the 10 leagues to Syracuse, over mountains and fields. His younger sister was a shy girl of 15, who had become engaged to an honest shepherd. Since Melos had neither father nor mother nor wife, he must select the bride's gown and order food for the wedding feast himself. It was to perform these tasks that he had come to Syracuse. Having taken care of this business, Melos strolled down the main street looking for Selenantius, a boyhood friend of his who worked in the city as a stonemason. They had not seen each other for quite some time, and Melos looked forward to the meeting. As he walked along, however, he began to sense that something was wrong. Since dusk had fallen, it was only natural that the city was quiet. Despite that, the place seemed so desolate that even the carefree Melos began to feel uneasy. He stopped a youngster and asked if anything had happened. On a trip here 2 years ago, he had found the place lively, with people singing even at night. The boy merely shrugged and didn't say anything. Melos next questioned an old man, more insistently than he had the boy. The man didn't reply either until, seizing and shaking him with both hands, Melos again asked what the trouble was. In a whisper that couldn't be overheard, the old man replied, "The king's executing people." "Why is that?" "He says we're evil, but it's not true. Has he executed many?" "Yes, first it was his own brother-in-law. And then his very son and heir. His sister and her children were next. And then the queen. The wise counselor Ararikis was..." "That's terrible," Melos interrupted. "Is the king mad?" "No, he's not mad. He says he can't trust people. Recently his own vassals have come under suspicion. If one of them lives a little too grandly, the king demands a hostage. And if the vassal refuses, why then he's condemned to death. The king had 6 of them crucified today." Melos quivered with rage as he listened. "That's terrible," he exclaimed. "The king has got to be stopped." Melos, being a simple man, marched straight into the castle, still carrying his purchases. When the guards seized him, they found a dagger inside his cloak. An uproar ensued, and Melos was dragged before King Dionysius, his face pale and his brow carved with wrinkles. The tyrant questioned Melos in a quiet but authoritative voice. "What were you going to do with this dagger? Speak up." Without flinching, Melos responded, "Free this town from its wicked king." "You?" The king's smile was condescending. "Impossible fool! How could someone like you realize how alone I am?" "Hold your tongue." Filled with indignation, Melos came right back at the king. "There's nothing worse than suspicion, and you suspect your own subjects. They made me suspicious. They're selfish and unreliable, and I can't trust them." The tyrant spoke these words calmly, and then he sighed. "After all, I want peace and quiet." "What for?" Melos sneered. "Except to keep your power. Killing innocent people, that's peace for you." Instantly the king looked up and retorted, "Silence, you wretch! You can prattle on about innocence, but I've got to see into people. I'll have you begging for mercy on the cross soon, but don't expect me to listen." "Ah, the king is wise. Go ahead, flatter yourself. I've decided to die anyway. I won't beg for mercy. Only..." Melos hesitated, his eyes lowered. "If you pity me at all, delay the execution for 3 days while I see to my sister's wedding. I'll return from my village once the ceremony's over. I'll be here within 3 days, I promise that." "Ridiculous!" The tyrant laughed softly, his voice hoarse. "Are you trying to tell me a captured bird will return after it's been let free? What a joke." "I'll be back," Melos insisted. "I don't break my word. Give me 3 days. My sister's expecting me. If you don't trust me..." "Alright then, there's a stonemason named Selenantius in this city. He's my best friend, and he will be my hostage. If I'm not back by sunset, have him strangled. Give me a chance. I'll prove I can keep my word." At these words, the cold-hearted tyrant grinned. He could tell that Melos was bluffing, and that he would never return. He would play along though, pretending to be taken in and letting Melos go free. It would be fun to have the hostage executed 3 days later, and as the execution was being carried out, he himself would wear a melancholy look, to show how much he regretted that people could not be trusted. Yes, he would teach those so-called honest fools a thing or two. I grant your request. You may summon the hostage, but come back, he cautioned, in 3 days, and by sunset. If you're late, I shall execute him. Well, on second thought, you might come back a bit late. I'll see that you're acquitted for good. What was that? Melos declared. I don't see what you're getting at. Oh, come now, anyone can see that you don't want to die. If it suits you, be late. I can tell what you are up to. Melos stamped the ground in anger. He wouldn't utter another word. Late that night, Selenuntius was brought to the castle, and the friends met in the presence of the king. Though 2 years had passed since their last meeting, Melos had only to explain the situation to Selenuntius, who nodded and firmly embraced his friend. Nothing more was required between them. After Selenuntius was bound with the rope, Melos set off under an early summer sky filled with stars. He hurried along the road, never pausing to rest. By the time he reached home, the sun was high, and the villagers were busy in the fields. His sister was there too, tending the flock. Seeing her weary brother approach with faltering steps, she began to ply him with questions. No, Melos replied, nothing's wrong. Forcing a smile, he went on. I've still got something to do in town, so I must go back soon. The wedding will take place tomorrow. The earlier the better. His sister blushed. Are you pleased? Look, I bought a new dress for you. Now go tell the villagers the ceremony will be tomorrow. After tottering on home, Melos barely managed to decorate the family altar and arrange the banquet chairs before collapsing to the floor. There he slept the entire day, hardly seeming to breathe. When he awoke, he went to see the bridegroom. There was a problem, he said, and the wedding would take place tomorrow. That was impossible, the amazed shepherd replied. He hadn't been able to prepare anything yet, and so he asked that the wedding wait until the grapes were harvested. He couldn't wait, Melos insisted. The groom would simply have to arrange the wedding for tomorrow. But the shepherd was stubborn, just like Melos, and he would not agree to the idea. They continued the dispute through the night until, finally, after much soothing and cajoling, Melos prevailed. By then, it was already dawn. At noon, the bride and groom took their marital vows before the gods. Yet even as the ceremony was taking place, dark clouds began to cover the sky. At first, just a few drops fell, but then the rain started coming down in torrents. The guests at the banquet felt something ominous, but they roused themselves and began clapping their hands and singing lively songs in spite of the warm, stifling air. For the time being, Melos could smile with delight, his promise to the king forgotten. The banquet grew even livelier as dusk fell. And the guests stopped worrying about the rain. They were good company, and Melos wished he could stay. But he was bound by a pledge, and could not do as he wished. Although he must leave the banquet, he could still have a nap before setting out. It was a long time before sunset tomorrow, and it would be best to leave only after the rain had let up. Even a hero such as Melos feels attached to his home, and that's why he would linger there as long as possible. Melos went up to the bride, who seemed almost dazed with happiness, and offered his congratulations. I'm very tired, he went on, and so I'll sleep a while, and then leave for town to take care of that business I mentioned to you. You're married to a fine man, so you won't miss me when I'm gone. You know the two things I hate most, don't you? Being suspicious of someone and telling lies. All I have to say is that I hope you'll be honest with your husband, and be proud of your brother too, for he may well achieve something. After the bride nodded to him as if she were dreaming, Melos went up. to the groom and clapped him on the shoulder. The wedding had to be performed all of a sudden, he explained, and neither one of us could do anything about this. I've got only 2 things of value, my sister and my sheep. I don't have anything else to give you. There's just one more thing to say, he went on. We're brothers now, and I want you to be proud of that. Melos smiled as the embarrassed groom rubbed his palms. Then he bade farewell to the villagers too, and left the banquet. When he reached his own sheep pen, Melos crawled inside and fell sound asleep. He awoke in the pale light of dawn. Oh God, he thought, springing to his feet. Have I overslept? No, there was still time. If he left at once, he would reach Syracuse by sunset. He would show the king that men kept their word, and then he would laugh as they fastened him to the cross. The rain seemed to slacken as Melos calmly prepared for the journey. When he was ready to leave, he swung his arms in a circle and dashed out into the drizzle like a flying arrow. Tonight I shall die, he told himself. I will be put to death for having run, but I will rescue my hostage friend and defeat the wicked king as well. I must run that I may be put to death. Melos, be faithful even in your youth. Farewell, my native village. It was heart-rending to leave, and young Melos almost halted several times. But each time he rebuked himself, crying, faster, faster, until his village receded behind, and he found himself cutting through fields and woods. By the time he reached the next village, the rain had stopped and the sun was well up in the sky. Clenching his hand, Melos wiped the sweat from his brow. Having come this far, he no longer yearned for home. The wedding had taken place, so he didn't worry any longer about his sister. He need only go straight to the castle, and since there was plenty of time before sunset, he could walk the rest of the way. Lapsing into his usual nonchalant manner, Melos strolled along chanting his favorite ballads. He covered 2 more leagues, then a third. When he was halfway to Syracuse, disaster suddenly confronted him. Melos stopped dead in his tracks. What a sight! The river before him had flooded from yesterday's downpour in the mountains. The muddy torrent had gathered strength and knocked the bridge out. Now it roared past, smashing the fallen girders to pieces. Melos stood in amazement before looking around and calling for help as loud as he could. But the boats had been swept from their moorings without a trace, and there was no longer even a ferryman present. The river kept rising until it spread out like a sea. Melos could only crouch on the bank and weep like a child in spite of his years. Lifting his arms, he prayed to Zeus. I beseech you, hold back this surging current. Time is going by, and the sun is high already. If I cannot reach the castle before dusk, my faithful friend will die. As if to mock his plea, the muddy torrent rose even further. Wave engulfed wave, whirling and spreading out as the moments slipped by. Melos decided there was only one way across, and that was to swim. Calling on the gods, to witness that the love and fidelity within him were stronger than this swift current, Melos plunged in. It was a desperate struggle, for the churning waves coiled about him like a mass of serpents. But Melos plowed ahead, putting all of his strength into each stroke. What matter if the swirling waves pounded him and pulled at his body? Perhaps the powers that be helped the fiercely struggling youth out of pity. In any event, he was being swept away when, bravo! He grasped a tree trunk on the opposite bank and held on. Praise be the gods! Melos shook the water from his body like a horse emerging from a stream. With the sun already going down, he could not waste a moment. And so he set off running again. Gasping for breath, he climbed the mountain pass. Having reached the top, he let out a sigh of relief, only to have a gang of thieves leap forth and cry, "Don't move." "What's the meaning of this?" Melos responded. "Get away, I've got to reach the king's castle before sunset." "Leave your goods, then be off. All I've got is my life, and I'm taking that to the king. We'll take it to him for you." "So the king sent you to ambush me, then?" Without a word, the thieves began swinging their clubs. Melos ducked quickly, then flew at the nearest assailant and wrenched away his weapon. "Sorry," he declared, "I wouldn't do this if my honor weren't at stake." A ferocious assault sent 3 of them sprawling. As the others cringed, Melos raced down the pass without even pausing for breath. As he ran on, however, the sun beat down on him and he felt exhausted. One bout of dizziness succeeded another, but he would not give in. With each attack, he summoned his strength and stumbled ahead a few steps. But finally, his knees buckled and he lay helpless. Gazing at the heavens, he wept in despair. "Ah, Melos, you swam a muddy torrent and knocked down 3 thieves. A mighty effort had brought him this far. He had run like Skanda himself, the Indian god who caught up with the fleeing culprit who made off with the ashes of Budo. But now he was exhausted and could not go on. How tragic that a dear friend would die for trusting him. The king had been right. Melos would be known as a notorious traitor." Melos reproached himself, but his sagging body could not even maintain a snail's pace. He rolled into the grass by the roadside. When the flesh is weary, the spirit too gives up, and somewhere within the body, a sense of indifference takes root. In this extremity, Melos simply gave up. He had already struggled valiantly, never questioning his pledge. And the gods knew he had done his best. He had run until he could no longer move. He wasn't a traitor. Oh, if only he could rend his breast and reveal the heart within. Then Selenantius would see that love and loyalty were in his very blood. But at this crucial moment, his strength was gone, leaving him utterly wretched. Surely he would be mocked and his family name besmirched. He had deceived his friend. Better if he had not set out at all than to collapse along the way. But fate had taken over and he no longer cared what happened. "Forgive me, Selenantius. You always trusted me and I've been loyal. Our friendship has never once been darkened by clouds of suspicion. Even now you await me, confident of my arrival. I am so grateful for that, Selenantius. Trust between friends is the world's finest treasure, and I can hardly endure what has happened. I ran, Selenantius. I never intended to deceive you, believe me. I ran faster and faster. I swam a muddy torrent and escaped a pack of thieves. I raced down the mountain pass in one breath. I did it because that's the sort of person I am. But don't expect anything more. Let me be. I don't care any longer. I've lost. I'm good for nothing. Oh, go ahead and laugh at me." The king whispered that I should return a little late. The hostage would be dead by then, and I could go free, he promised. I hated the king for being so deceitful, but things are turning out his way. I'll probably be late, and he'll just assume he was right. He'll have a good laugh and then let me go, and that will be worse than death. I'll always be a traitor, the lowest of creatures. Selenantius, I too shall die. Let me die with you. You alone trust me, that's certain. Or Melos suddenly wondered, am I merely taking you for granted too? Perhaps I should just be a scoundrel. I've got a home in the village and the sheep too. If I live, my sister and her husband will surely welcome me back. Justice, love, fidelity, They're really worthless when you think about it. We kill others to save our own skin. That's the way of the world, isn't it? Oh, nonsense. I'm just a disgraceful traitor. It's all over for you, Melos. You're finished. Go ahead and do as you please. Stretching his limbs, the hero dozed off. Melos awoke to the sound of trickling water. Holding his breath, he slowly raised his head. The sound seemed to come from just beyond his outstretched legs. Struggling to his feet, Melos saw clear water bubbling from a rock. He bent over the spring as if drawn down into it. Then he scooped a handful of water and swallowed it. Melos breathed deeply, as though awakening from a dream. He could walk. He must be off. Perhaps he could still fulfill his pledge and die with honor. The rays of the setting sun still shone on the branches and leaves of the trees. Dusk had not yet fallen, and his friend must be waiting, quietly, trustfully. Compared with that trust, Melos' life meant nothing. He could take his own life to make up for his suspicion, but that would be too simple. He must live up to his friend's trust. That alone mattered. Thereupon he cried out, "Melos, run!" Someone trusted him. The evil dream of moments before was a delusion, and he must forget it. When exhausted, anyone might have such a dream. Melos' honor was still intact, and he was brave as ever. He figured that if he started running now, he could still arrive on time. How fortunate! He could die honorably. But he realized that the sun was going down fast, and soon it would be gone. "Oh, Zeus," he pleaded, "please don't hurry things so much. I grew up loyal, so don't let me die a traitor." He fled like the very wind, shoving aside or knocking down wayfarers in his path. There was a group of revelers picnicking in the meadow too, and Melos ran right through them, leaving everyone bewildered. He kicked away a dog and hurdled a stream, his pace far exceeding that of the sun, racing by another group of travelers. He caught an ominous remark. The fellow should be hanging from the cross about now. Ah, this was the friend for whom Melos ran, the friend who must not die. Hurry, Melos, you mustn't be late. Reveal the power of love and fidelity. Don't worry about your appearance. Melos was almost naked. He could hardly breathe, and blood spurted now and again from his mouth. Then he saw it, the Tower of Syracuse. The small and far off, the tower glinted in the setting sun. Then a voice seemed to groan in the wind. "Ah, Melos, who is it?" Melos called even as he ran. "Philostratus, apprentice to your good friend Selnantius," cried the youth, even as he hurried after Melos. "Stop, it's too late. He can't be saved. The sun's not down yet. They're putting him to death this very moment. You're too late. What a shame. If you had only been a little faster." "But the sun's still up," cried Melos, his heart nearly bursting as he stared at the huge red orb. He knew that he must persevere. "Stop, please. Don't run any further. Your life's at stake now. Selnantius believed in you. He was calm when they led him to the gallows. Even as the king mocked him, he remained faithful. He simply replied, 'Melos will return.'" "That's why I run," Melos retorted. "Because he trusts me. It doesn't make any difference whether I'm on time. I'm running for more than a life. Follow me, Philostratus." "Ah, you must have lost your senses," exclaimed Philostratus. Then he gave in and said, "Well, maybe you won't be late, so keep on running." This was well said. The sun had not yet disappeared, and Melos ran with his last ounce of strength. His mind was blank. He didn't think of anything. Impelled by a mysterious force, he merely ran. Finally, as the quivering sun dipped beneath the horizon and the twilight began to fade, Melos raced like the wind onto the execution grounds. He was in time. He tried to cry out, "Wait, don't execute him. Melos has returned. Here I am, just as I promised." but with his throat so raw he could barely whisper, and no one had heard him. The cross had been raised, and Salmantius, a rope wound about his body, was being slowly hoisted. Melos plunged into the crowd, struggling forward with all his remaining strength, just as he had when he had swum the muddy torrent. "Hangman, it's me." Though hoarse, Melos cried out as best as he could. "I'm the condemned one, Melos. I left Salmantius as a hostage. Now I'm back." Finally, Melos climbed up the platform and caught hold of his friend's ascending feet. A stir ran through the crowd, and everyone cried out together, "Hurrah, let him down!" Salmantius was freed of his bonds. With tears in his eyes, Melos addressed his friend. "Strike me, Salmantius, strike me with all your might. I had an evil dream on the way back. If you don't strike me, I shall not be worthy to embrace you. Strike me." Salmantius nodded as though he understood everything. Then he slapped Melos forcefully on the right cheek, the blow resounding throughout the grounds. Thereupon Salmantius smiled gently and said, "Strike me, Melos. Strike me on the cheek just as hard. Once during the 3 days you were away, I lost my trust in you, for the first time ever. If you don't strike me, I won't be able to embrace you." His hand whizzing through the air, Melos slapped his friend on the cheek. "Thank you, friend," they both said at the same time. Then they embraced each other firmly and wept with joy. In the crowd, too, weeping could be heard. The tyrant Dionysius, who had been gazing from the rear, silently approached the two friends with a look of shame on his face. "You have won me over, and your hopes are fulfilled. Loyalty isn't just a hollow word," he said. "Will you both accept me as a friend? Please listen to this request. I wish to be your friend." A cheer went up from the crowd. "Long live the king! Long live the king!" A girl came forward, holding a scarlet cloak. Melos was confused, so his friend stepped in and said, "Melos, don't you realize you're utterly naked? Hurry up and put the cloak on. This pretty girl doesn't want everyone here seeing you like that." The hero blushed deeply. From a traditional legend and the Schiller poem,